right, so April shoots an arrow upward with an initial velocity of 80 feet per second from a platform 25 feet high. When will it reach 125 feet? So this is the generic form for our projectile motions. The middle term represents your initial velocity here, this number in front, and then the initial height is your third term. So let's write this equation here. So it's negative 16t squared, your initial velocity, you're going to plug that in for v sub 0. It said it was 80 feet per second. So this is plus 80t. And then the third term is your initial height. Your initial height is 25 feet. The platform is 25 feet high. All right, we need to know when the rocket reaches 125 feet. So again, this represents the height in relation to time. So we're plugging in 125 feet here. We need to know when that's exactly 125 feet. So negative 16t squared plus 80t plus 25. So essentially we're solving for time, right? So in order to solve a quadratic, the first thing you need to do is make sure it's equal to 0. So I'm going to move the 25 over by subtracting 125 from both sides. So I am left with 0 is equal to negative 16t squared plus 80t, and this gives me minus 100. The next thing I'm going to do is notice that all three terms have a common factor of 4, so I could factor out a 4 from all three terms. So this gives me negative 4t squared plus 20t minus 25. And from there, I could actually divide both sides by 4 to move that 4 to the left side, so that kind of eliminates the 4 completely. So I have negative 4t squared plus 20t minus 25. Then from here, in order to solve, there's really two options. Factor and apply the zero product property if it can't be factored, or you can always use quadratic formula. So I'm going to try to factor this, and the very first thing I need to do in order to factor this is I need to make sure my very first term is positive. So essentially, in order to modify this to make sure it is positive, I can multiply both sides by negative 1, which essentially flips all three signs of this trinomial. So if I multiply both sides by negative 1, I would be left with 4t squared minus 20t plus 25. All right, now I'm ready to factor. So I'm going to have to factor this by grouping, because there's a number in the very front of the t squared. So for grouping, I would multiply the first and last number. 4 times 25 is 100. So we're saying what multiplies to 100 and adds to negative 20. So the factor pair would be negative 10 and negative 10, because that multiplies to give you positive 100. And if you combine negative 10 plus negative 10, you get negative 20. So we're going to rewrite the expanded form now. I'm just going to rewrite it here. So factor by grouping, you rewrite the expanded. The first and back terms stay the same, but the middle term gets broken up. So 4t squared, instead of negative 20t, I'm going to use my two factors here, negative 10t and then negative 10t, because again, that recombines as negative 20t, and then plus 25. Essentially, I will set this equal to 0, but right now I just want to convert the expanded to factored form. So from here, I look at my two groups and I factor by finding the greatest common factor of each. So the biggest number that divides 4 and 10 would be 2, and they both share a t. So what would be left inside? Well, 2t times 2t gets me back to 4t squared minus 2t times 5 gets me negative 10t. Bring down the minus sign, and then the next pair here, the biggest number that divides 10 and 25 would be 5. And what would be left inside? Well, for factor by grouping, these should always match. The parentheses always matches. So if I fill in 2t minus 5, and I distribute this 5 to both terms to check, negative 5 times 2t is negative 10t, and negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. So it worked out. So my two factors would be the matching parenthesis, which is 2t minus 5, and then what is left on the outside, which is 2t minus 5. So in fact, the factors are identical. All right, so now that it is factored, I can apply the zero product property to solve this. And that says if both of these multiply to give an answer of 0, then one of these has to be 0. Either the 2t minus 5 is equal to 0, and since you have the exact same parentheses, here you don't need to solve the equation again. So 2t minus 5 is equal to 0. So add 5 to both sides. So I get 2t is equal to 5. And if you divide, I'll write that here. 2t is equal to 5. If I divide both sides by by 2, I get t is equal to 5 halves, or 2.5. So I'm going to write it as 2.5, or you can write it as 2.5. So to answer our question here, when will it reach 125 feet? At 2.5 seconds, or you can write it as 2.5 seconds.